In 2008, a Harvard-educated economist lost his entire life savings in the financial crisis. Not because he didn't see it coming, he did. He wrote a paper predicting it 2 years earlier. He lost everything because he was too smart to act on his own research. This isn't a story about ignorance. It's about how intelligence itself becomes the trap. Here's something nobody tells you about being smart. It can bankrupt you, not through reckless spending, not through gambling, but through something psychologists call analysis paralysis, combined with what's known as the intelligence trap. Picture this scenario. Two people want to start investing. Person A has average intelligence, reads a basic book on index funds, and starts putting money into a simple portfolio. Person B is brilliant, has read 50 books on investing, understands complex derivatives, and knows the efficient market hypothesis inside out. Who do you think does better over 20 years? The research is brutal. Studies show that beyond a certain threshold, higher IQ doesn't correlate with better financial outcomes. In fact, above an IQ of around 120, the correlation starts to weaken. Sometimes it even reverses. Why? Because smart people fall into a trap that average people never encounter. They overthink themselves into inaction. They see too many variables. They understand too many risks. They wait for the perfect moment that never comes. Psychologist David Perkins at Harvard calls this the intelligence trap. Smart people are better at constructing elaborate justifications for not taking action. They can articulate 17 reasons why now isn't the right time to invest, to negotiate a raise, to start that business. And every single reason sounds perfectly logical. But here's the kicker. While they're building their airtight logical fortress, the less intelligent person who started simple has already captured 10 years of compound growth. Intelligence, it turns out, is exceptional at identifying problems, but it's terrible at ignoring them long enough to act. The smartest people in the room are often the ones most paralyzed by their own brilliance. They've thought themselves into a corner, and that corner is expensive. Let me tell you about one of the most expensive examples of smart people sabotaging themselves in business history. In the 1970s, Xerox PARC employed some of the brightest minds in technology. We're talking legitimate geniuses. PhDs from MIT and Stanford. These people invented the graphical user interface, the mouse, Ethernet networking, laser printing, object-oriented programming. They essentially invented the future of personal computing. The estimated value of the innovations created at Xerox PARC? Trillions of dollars in today's money. How much did Xerox capture of that value? Almost nothing. In 1979, Steve Jobs visited PARC. The engineers, proud of their work, showed him everything. Jobs walked out and built the Macintosh. He later said it was like walking into a gold mine. Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, 3Com. All of them built empires on ideas that came from Xerox PARC. Meanwhile, Xerox remained a photocopier company. Why did this happen? The engineers at PRC understood their inventions at a level Jobs never would. They knew every limitation, every edge case, every reason why the technology wasn't quite ready. They were smart enough to see all the problems. Jobs was just smart enough to see the opportunity. The Xerox executives were equally brilliant. They had MBAs from top schools. They could articulate sophisticated reasons why personal computers didn't fit Xerox's core competency, why the market wasn't ready, why the margins wouldn't work. They were smart enough to justify doing nothing. This is what psychologists call the curse of knowledge. When you understand something deeply, you become trapped by that understanding. You see complexity where others see simplicity. You see obstacles where others see paths. The Xerox PARC engineers knew too much to act decisively. Steve Jobs knew just enough to move fast. By 1989, Xerox had completely missed the personal computer revolution they invented. The total opportunity cost? Conservative estimates put it at over $200 billion. That's not the cost of being stupid. That's the cost of being too smart. There's a name for what happened at Xerox PRC and what happens to smart people every day. Psychologists call it self-handicappings. The concept was first studied extensively by Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones at Duke University in 1978. They discovered something remarkable. When people are told they're smart or talented, they start creating obstacles for themselves. Not consciously, but systematically. A smart person preparing for a salary negotiation might stay up late the night before, overthinking their strategy. They'll rehearse 17 different scenarios. They'll research obscure negotiation tactics. And they'll walk in exhausted, having self-handicapped their own performance. Why? Because if they fail, they can blame the preparation, not their intelligence. As Morgan Housel writes in The Psychology of Money, financial success isn't about what you know. It's about how you behave. And intelligent people often develop the most destructive behaviors precisely because their intelligence helps them justify those behaviors. There's another mechanism at play here called identity protection. Research by Carol Dweck at Stanford shows that people with a fixed mindset about intelligence, those who believe, I am smart as an identity, will actively avoid situations that might disprove that identity. If you derive your self-worth from being the smartest person in the room, you'll never enter rooms where you might not be the smartest. You'll avoid investing because you might pick wrong. You'll avoid negotiating because you might fail. You'll avoid entrepreneurship because you might look foolish. The tragic irony? The moves that build wealth, simple investing, consistent saving, unglamorous business building, don't require genius. They require something smarter people often lack. The willingness to look average while doing boring things consistently. Intelligence also creates another wealth-destroying pattern. Smart people are better at constructing narratives. Daniel Kahneman documented this in Thinking Fast and Slow. We're wired to create coherent stories from random events. But smart people create more sophisticated stories. They can take any financial failure and weave it into a narrative where they're still the hero who was too principled to compromise, too knowledgeable to follow the herd, too sophisticated to do the simple thing. These narratives feel true. They protect the ego. And they keep you poor. But here's where it gets interesting. Some smart people figure out the trap. And when they do, they become unstoppable. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, has an IQ that's off the charts. He's read thousands of books. He understands complex mathematics, psychology, physics, and history. But Munger built his fortune by doing something that sounds almost stupid in its simplicity. He invested in simple businesses he could understand, held them for decades, and spent most of his time reading instead of trading. That's it. When asked about his strategy, Munger said something revealing. It is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. Notice the framing. Not stupid. Not intelligent. There's a psychological insight buried in that phrase. Munger recognized that his intelligence was most valuable when he used it to avoid clever ideas, not create them. He uses his intelligence as a filter, not an engine. Another example. John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, had a brilliant insight about investing. After understanding efficient market hypothesis, portfolio theory, and fee structures at a sophisticated level, he asked a devastatingly simple question. If most investors can't beat the market, why not just buy the whole market? The financial industry hated this idea. It was too simple. Sophisticated investors with multiple degrees scoffed at it. They could articulate complex reasons why active management was superior. Bogle ignored them. The Vanguard 500 Index Fund, launched in 1976, now has over $500 billion in assets. It's made ordinary investors wealthy by being boring. The smart money spent decades trying to prove Bogle wrong with sophisticated strategies. Most of them underperformed his simple fund. What separated Bogle and Munger from the smart people who sabotage themselves? They recognized that their intelligence was a tool to use selectively, not an identity to protect constantly. They were smart enough to act dumb, or, more precisely, they were wise enough to know when simplicity beats sophistication. They studied complex systems to arrive at simple principles. Then they had the discipline to follow those principles, even when their intelligence whispered that they could do something cleverer. That's the paradox. It takes significant intelligence to recognize when not to use your intelligence. Most smart people never make that leap. So how do you escape the intelligence trap? How do you stop sabotaging your own wealth? The answer isn't to think less. It's to think differently. First, recognize the pattern. Every time you find yourself building an elaborate justification for an action, that's the trap. Your intelligence is working against you. Smart people don't need more analysis. They need pre-commitment. Warren Buffett has a 20-slot rule. Imagine you could only make 20 investment decisions in your lifetime. Would you spend 3 years analyzing each opportunity? No. You'd make simpler decisions faster. Second, implement what psychologists call bright line rules. These are non-negotiable boundaries that bypass your ability to rationalize. Not, I'll invest when the market feels right. That's too flexible. Your intelligence will always find a reason why now isn't right. Instead, I invest 15% of every paycheck on the first of the month, regardless of market conditions. Now, no analysis required, no decision fatigue, no opportunity for your intelligence to sabotage you. Third, separate learning from doing. Smart people love learning. They'll read 50 books on real estate investing. But reading isn't building wealth. Action is. Create a rule. For every book you read, take one concrete action, no matter how small. Read about investing? Open a brokerage account. Read about negotiation? Ask for a raise. Your intelligence should inform action, not replace it. Fourth, find an action bias accountability partner, not another smart person who will collaborate on your sophisticated analysis. Find someone less intelligent who acts more. Someone who will ask the uncomfortable question, "That's interesting, but what did you actually do this week?" Fifth, and this is crucial, redefine how you measure your intelligence. Stop measuring it by how many problems you can identify. Start measuring it by how simply you can act despite those problems. As Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, once said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Your intelligence makes you the most sophisticated self-deceiver in the room." Remember that economist from the beginning? The Harvard PhD who predicted the 2008 crisis but lost everything anyway? The lesson isn't that he should have been less educated. It's that he should have used his education differently. He knew enough to be right, but he was too smart to be simple. He tried to time the perfect exit. He built complex hedging strategies. He waited for confirmation of his confirmation. Meanwhile, less sophisticated investors who followed simple rules, maintained 6 months of cash, don't use leverage, diversify broadly, survive just fine. They weren't smart enough to try anything clever. And that's exactly what saved them. Your intelligence is a superpower, but like any superpower, it can destroy you if you don't learn to control it. The wealthiest people aren't the smartest. They're the ones who got smart enough to stop being clever. That's the real intelligence. If this resonated with you, you'll want to see the next video about why poor people and rich people make the same financial mistakes for completely different psychological reasons. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.